In this video, we are going to do some solving rational equations with an application problem. So our question here says, after taking an antibiotic, the concentration C of the drug in a patient's bloodstream is shown by the equation below, where T is the time in hours since taking the antibiotic. And we have C at T equals 0.04 T divided by T squared minus 2. So the first question says, what is the approximate concentration after 4 hours? So 4 hours is time, and in the question it said that T was the time in hours. So our units match. So this is just what we're going to sub in for T. So I'm going to take my equation and we are going to put a 4 everywhere we see the letter T. So I'm going to have C at 4 equals 0.04 T, so we're putting in another 4, divided by T, so 4 squared minus 2. All right, this is just a straightforward calculation question. I'm going to simplify my numerator and denominator. So I'm going to do 0.04 times 4, which is 0.16. And then 4 squared minus 2, which is 14. And then I'm going to divide 0.16 by 14. And I got, this delightful decimal here. So it asks in the question for us to round to 2 decimal places. So I would keep the 0, 1, take a peek at that next number. It's a 1, so we are going to round down. So we're going to leave it as 0.01. To show that I rounded, I'm going to put a little dot over my equal sign. And then because this is an application question, I do need to write myself a little sentence as my answer. So it says, what is the approximate concentration after 4 hours? I'm going to say, therefore, the concentration. You could say the concentration after 4 hours. I'm just going to say the concentration is 0.01. And then I'm going to check for units. So it said that the time was in hours, but it didn't tell me what the unit was for the concentration. I do notice in the next question it just says units, so I think I'm just going to write units. Sometimes though, the concentration might be in moles per liter or something like that. But in this question it didn't say. So the concentration is 0.01 units, approximately. All right, part B says, after how many hours will the concentration be 0.05 units? So the 0.05 units is the concentration, that's what it says. And in the question, it says the concentration is the letter C. So that means that C equals 0.05. Okay. So I'm going to take my equation, and everywhere we have a C, I'm going to put in 0.05. And because I can't see the equation anymore, I am just going to rewrite it down first. Okay, so when I put in 0.05 for C, we're not going to do 0.05 times T. That's not what it means. The C of T, that's what we're putting 0.05 in for both parts. Oh, didn't mean to do that. So 0.05 is 0.04 T divided by T squared minus 2. Okay. So this is a rational equation. We have a fraction that has a T in the denominator. So we have choices. We could move everything to one side and get a common denominator, or we can do what I prefer, which is cross multiplying. So there are times when you don't have a choice. if you had this and then plus another function, you would have to get a common denominator. But since it's only one fraction and then a number, then I can absolutely cross multiply. 0.05 is secretly over 1. And then I am going to multiply t squared minus 2 by 0.05, right? Because the opposite of dividing is multiplying. And then we're going to multiply 1 by 0.04t. Same idea. To cancel out a division by 1, we have to multiply the other side by 1. All right, so you don't have to write it out like this, but I am just going to, because it's our note, put the step in showing how I'm multiplying. If you want to just do the multiplication, go for it. So I have 0.05 times t squared minus 2 equals 1 times 0.04t. I am going to multiply 0.05 by t squared to get 0.05 t squared. And 0.05 times negative 2 is negative 0.1. On the other side, 1 times 0.04t is 0.04t. And now I have a polynomial equation, right? It's not a rational anymore. There's no longer any fractions. So all I really need to do at this point is pick a method. We've got 3 choices. We can solve by rearranging, we can solve by factoring, or we can solve by quadratic formula. Rearranging is not going to work because I have more than one term with a t, so that's not good, which means I need to factor or use quadratic formula. Now, if I'm factoring or using quadratic formula, the next step is the same, and that is to put all of your terms on one side. The highest exponent is a square. That term is already positive, so I'm going to leave it where it is, and I'm going to move that 0.04t to the other side by subtracting. Okay, 0.05 t squared, it's the only t squared we have. The 0.04t that we are subtracting from the other side, there are no like terms to put it with, so I'm going to go minus 0.04t, and then I have negative 0.1, which also doesn't have any like term friends, and then on the other side we've taken everything away, so it just equals 0. All right, from here I have choices. We could try to factor. We could try to use quadratic formula. If I was going to try to factor, I would probably start by doing something about the decimals. Maybe try factoring out a 0.01 or something like that to see where it takes me. But I am a little concerned that in the question it talked about rounding my final answer, which makes me think it might not factor. So I would probably just go for quadratic formula, especially since there are decimals here. So if I decide to use quadratic formula, my a value would be 0.05. My b would be negative 0.04. And my c is going to be negative 0.1. And my formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And we are solving not for x, but for t. So we probably should make that x a t instead, right? It's always whatever the middle term is. If you left it as an x, that's okay, but technically it should be a t. But I will say the formula does normally start with x equals, right? So if you wrote it that way, it's okay. All right, so my t is going to equal negative 0.04. So 2 negatives make a positive, so I get 0.04 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 0.04 squared. Please make sure you put that in a bracket or your calculator may not give you the right answer. And then minus 4 times a, so 0.05, times c, which is negative 0.1. And then that is all divided by 2 times 0.05. Okay, my calculator is going to do this work for me. So I'm going to leave the 0.04 And then I'm going to work out what is underneath that square root. So I have negative 0.04 squared minus 4 times 0.05 times negative 0.1. And I got 0.0216. And I am just going to double check to make sure. Yep, got the same answer a second time. And then in the denominator, 2 times 0.05 is 0.1. Okay, now, does this number have a nice square root? No. So if it did, I would work it out and then just write the answer here. But because it worked out to be a decimal, I don't really want to have to write that down. So I am just going to split it into its two answers. So I have t equals 0.04 plus the square root of 0.0216, and then that is divided by 0.1. And then the other one is going to be t equals 0.04 minus the square root of 0.0216. Did I ever tell you I don't really like decimals? 0.1. There's just so much to write. And so easy for me to make a mistake and not copy down something correctly. Okay, we are going to try calculating that. All right, so on this one, I'm going to do 0.04 plus, and then the square root of 0.0216. I need to square root that. You make sure you hit equals before you do your division, please. And I get 1.86, but the next digit is a 9, so that's going to round to approximately 1.87. All right, we're going to do the second one, same idea, just with the minus. So I have 0.04, take away the square root of 0.0216, that's square rooted. Please make sure you hit equals, otherwise all you're doing is dividing the square root by 0.1 and not the whole numerator. And I divide by 0.1. And I get t equals negative 1 point, that is 0.6, but the next digit's a 9, so that's going to be 1.07. All right, so we have two solutions, 1.87 and negative 1.07. So if this was just a question where we were just calculating and solving for t, I would stop there and write a therefore. But this was an application question, so I'm going to go back and read what the question asked. It says, after how many hours will the concentration be 0.05 units? So this would be after 1.87 hours. Does that seem reasonable? Sure. And negative 1.07 hours. Does that seem reasonable? Not so much, right? Negative would mean that was before they even took the medication. So the negative doesn't make sense in terms of time. So you cannot have negative time. So I'm going to cross this out and say can't have negative time. So if you ever need to throw one of your answers away, you need to give me a reason why you threw it away. So that really just leaves this one. So after how many hours will the concentration be 0.05 units? So I'm going to say therefore the concentration, word's awfully long, will be 0.05 units at 1.87 hours. All right, and that does it for our lesson on solving rational equations.